Joining me now to tell us how he feels, director Quentin Tarantino. A pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much. I want to read for you the transcript of that statement that has gotten so much attention,
Sure.
and just ask you to elaborate. So this is what you said. He said, you know, what am I doing here? I'm doing here because I'm a human being with a conscience, and when I see murder, I cannot stand by, and I have to call the murdered, and I have to call the murderers, the murderers. What do you mean by that?
Well, we were at a rally that was dealing with unarmed people, mostly black and brown, who have been shot and killed or beaten or strangled by the police. And I was obviously referring to the people in those type of situations. I was referring to Eric Gardner. I was referring to Sam DuBose. I was referring to Antonio Guzman Lopez. I was referring to Tamir Rice. That's what I was referring to.
So you're referring to specific cases in which a police use of force has taken the life of someone in a way that you feel was murder.
Yeah, I believe, yeah, in those cases in particular that we're talking about, I actually do believe that they were murder. Now, in the case of Walter Scott, who was the man running in the park and was shot in the back, in the case of Sam DuBose, I believe those were murder, and they were deemed murder. And the reason, and the only reason they were deemed murder is because the incidences were caught on video. However, if they had not been caught on video, the murderers would have gotten away with their murder. In the case of Eric Gardner, in the case of Tamir Rice, I believe that those were murders, but they were exonerated.
There's something about that word, obviously, which has set off police unions and many police officers. Why do you think, were you surprised by the, frankly, the vitriol with which they've responded to those comments?
Well, yeah, I was surprised. I was under the impression I was an American and that I had First Amendment rights, and there was no problem with me going to an anti-police brutality protest and speaking my mind. And just because I was at an anti-police brutality protest doesn't mean I'm anti-police. And basically, there was a lot of people at that rally, and we were all crying for a lot of things, but there was one thing in particular, which was stop shooting unarmed people. We want justice, but stop shooting unarmed people. But they don't want to deal with that. They would rather start arguments with celebrities than examine the concerns put before them by a citizenry that has lost trust in them.
So, when I first saw the news of this, and my first thought was, wow, what was Quentin Tarantino doing at this march in New York City? How did you come to be at that event?
Well, the organization who put it on was it's called Rise Up October. And they got in touch with me because I had made statements in some interviews, along the way that had suggested that I'm on their side when it comes to this issue of, ultimately what I feel is a problem of white supremacy in this country. And they realized that I was, they gathered that I was on their side, and they approached me about it, and they explained the situation to me, and I was happy to show up. And the reason I was happy to show up, and what we were doing there was, it was a 3-day rally. I took part in 2 days of it. And the main thing that we were trying to do there was stop. There's a lot of statistics going around about how many people unarmed people have been killed by the police. But we want them to stop being numbers. We want them to stop being statistics and start being people who were once living and breathing and are now dead. And the idea was to go there and to say their names and to show their pictures and to send the families over to New York and tell their stories about what happened. Really, for us to bear witness to those stories. And the other day of the rally, which was the march, was to demand justice and demand that the police stop shooting unarmed people.
Do you think, I saw a number of people talk about this, a number of critics, police officers, reference the shooting death of Officer Holder, which had happened a few days beforehand and was obviously tremendously tragic and awful for the city and for police officers, his family. Do you think that you were being insensitive by saying this, as some have alleged, essentially, with this being within a week of this tragedy?
Well, the timing was very unfortunate, and his death, that officer's death, is a tragedy. acknowledge that 100%. And my heart goes out to him and goes out to his loved ones. However, the point of the rally was to bring these families. We had over 40 families, not 40 people, but 40 different families that this has happened to come out and tell their stories and say their loved one's name. And that's what's not being talked about. And so what? Because that happened, we're going to say, oh, no, don't tell your story. I know we flew you out here. We're going to fly you back. We'll do it at another time. It's just not convenient.
You were the subject of a fairly interesting speech on the the floor of the House of Representatives today from a Texas congressman. I want to play you a little bit of that if you would like to respond. This is Congressman Ted Poe of Texas inveighing against Quentin Tarantino. Take a listen.
He referred to peace officers as murderers. His hateful rhetoric called for violence against law enforcement, saying, I have to call a murderer a murderer, and I have to call a murder a murder. And adding that he is on the side of the ones who confront and are confronted by police. His comments encourage mischief and crimes against peace officers. For the haters to justify lawlessness in response to perceived lawless acts by the police is idiotic.
You have a response to the congressman?
Well, that's not what I said. You've actually, it's easy enough to find out what I said because I didn't say that much. So,
right.
And you actually had my entire speech there on your thing. That's their way. They're being inflammatory. They're slandering me. I'm not a cop hater. But Patrick Lynch, that's the way they attack me, is calling me a cop hater. That's the way that Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark, who's on Fox all the time, says that I'm putting police in danger by standing up for the rights of unarmed citizens who have been killed by the police. But at the same time, they say that about anybody who acknowledges that there's a problem in law enforcement in this country right now is considered by law enforcement part of the problem, whether that be me, whether that be Bill de Blasio, whether that be President Barack Obama, who in the case of both Patrick Lynch and David Clark have accused all three of us of this action.
Yeah, is that what you think this is about? That's why you think they have seized on this comment and given it as much life as it has been given?
Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, it's much easier to feign outrage and start arguments with celebrities than it is to deal with the fact that the citizenry has lost trust in them. But there's also another thing going on, absolutely. There was 300 people in that march. They're not dealing with the issues that we were talking about, which you would think they'd want to deal with, at least to some degree or another. No, they want to demonize me. They want to slander me, imply that I'm saying things that I didn't say. And then, and for what reason? The reason is because they want me to shut up, and they want to make sure that no other people like me, prominent citizens, will stand up for that side.
Let me ask you this: you've got this movie coming out, and you're promoting it, and it's been in the works, and people have written a lot about it. It's widely anticipated, I think it's fair to say. Have you gotten pressure from anyone to just basically shut up and apologize and keep it moving?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm sure that the company that's producing the movie, I'm sure this is a pain in the butt that they wish they didn't have to deal with. At the same time, that same company released the movie Fruitvale Station, so they're very aware of the problem, and they stand behind me.
All right. I should make the point here. The statements that we're reading are from police unions, which don't necessarily always, particularly in tone or in sentiment, encapsulate all police officers' thoughts on the matter. There's a sort of a tone to police union statements that we've come to expect after these that tend to be maximalist. I mean, have you had conversations with police officers in the wake of this?
Not as of yet. I'm hoping that is going to start happening sometime. I'm hoping that's going to start happening sometime in the next week or so. And I agree with you about these mouthpieces saying what they're saying. They're calling for a boycott, and and maybe that boycott will happen, but maybe it won't, because I actually have a whole lot of police officers who are big fans of my work, and they're not going to take Patrick Lynch's word on what I said. They're going to read what I said. They'll watch this show. They'll hear what I have to say, and I think they'll make up their own mind, and we'll see what happens.
All right, Quentin Tarantino, thank you very much for your time tonight, sir. Appreciate it.